Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to connect you with Senator Ryan McDougle. Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you too, Woody. Thank you for having me on.
I know that you are chair of the Republican Senate Caucus. Tell us about your responsibilities and challenges.
Well, with everything we do, there's some responsibilities and challenges. But that's the group of senators who are in the Republican Party, and we just try to make sure that we are communicating with each other. We know what bills are coming up, what policies, and we're talking about those bills and policies. On the Senate Republican Caucus, we are different than maybe some of the others, including Republican and Democrat in other bodies, in that we don't have binding votes. We try to build consensus with our group. In the majority, that consensus means whether bills pass or do not pass. In the minority, we have to really focus on which issues we're making sure we're messaging on the differences. But as you know, there's still a number of bills that move through the system that are not partisan, Republican or Democrat, but they might be geographic, they might be urban or rural or benefit certain parts of the Commonwealth over others. And so we try to have all those discussions as well.
Now, I know you have a very large district. You represent about 200,000 people. What's going on in Spotsylvania County and the Federicksburg area?
I think when the districts were first created, they were about 200,000. Probably now it's closer to 225 to 250,000, and next year redistricting will occur. But the part of my district that's in Spotsylvania and that region, I also represent Caroline, parts of Hanover, that 95 corridor, have some very similar and some very different issues. Part of Spotsylvania is very rural, like the Partlow, Blades Corner area, and then part of it is more urban, like the Lee Hill area. My wife is a former Spotsylvania Cougar, and my little girl continues to yell "Go Cougars" at times, and just the differences that Spotsylvania has undergone in the last 20 years are substantial. But the issues that citizens worry about are fairly similar. They worry about transportation, getting to and from work, to and from their children. They worry about education, making sure that their children are getting the high class, high caliber education that they expect. And they're worried about being able to support their families, and as a result, how much that they have to pay in taxes as well. So everybody has the same issues. Some of the geographic issues are a little more acute. Historically, we've worked to make sure that there are VRE spots there in Fredericksburg. Access to jobs in Northern Virginia or DC are faster. We always struggle with transportation on 95. There's a tremendous amount of construction, and the hot lanes will go now to Central Park as soon as they're complete. So some real positive moves going forward, but there's always more work to be done.
Now, you mentioned redistricting, and of course, there's a resolution that passed last year that will have to pass in identical form in order for the voters to determine whether they want an independent bipartisan redistricting commission. Where does that stand right now?
Supposedly it's going to come up in committee later this week in the Privileges and Elections Committee for a vote. The constitutional amendment piece of redistricting is only part of the solution, because that would go to, if passed, it would go to the voters in November, and the voters would be able to say whether they agree or disagree with that. But the devil's in the details, and the rest of that are the criteria that nonpartisan or supposedly bipartisan group would use. And if the legislature sets the criteria in a partisan way or a very political way, then the impact of a bipartisan commission is less. So we'll be watching both of those pieces very carefully as they work through the process. Our districts that were created, I guess, 9 years ago were actually drawn in the Senate by Senate Democrats. The House districts at that time were drawn by House Republicans. So we've had some very different approaches to redistricting in the last decade.
Now, this commission would redraw the lines not on the state level, but on the congressional level as well.
They would draw 3 different sets of lines. One set of lines for the House of Delegates, where there are 100 members. One set of lines for the state Senate, which I'm in. There are 40 members in the Senate. And then they would redraw the congressional districts, depending on what the population says, likely to be the same, or could be one more, unlikely to be one less.
And of course, there are 16 members of this commission appointed by the legislature?
Well, it would, in the partisan redistricting, that's what the people vote on. But I want to focus in the part that's really important is what are the decisions that can be made. One of the concerns that I'm going to have as that part goes through the process is that commission going to be able to look at geographic compactness. As you indicated, my district is 10 counties. Before redistricting, it was 6. And I had the same number, actually more people, and redistricting gave me more geography but fewer people. But it split those jurisdictions up into pieces. People that live close to each other and have the same issues, like transportation, like school and law enforcement, and those issues, they should be able to come together to elect their representatives so they know that their representatives are actually going to be fighting for the issues that they find are important. When districts are made up and pieced, so you have 1 precinct in 1 county and 2 precincts in a city that might not even be in the same region, certainly not in the same transportation or school districts, it makes it much harder for the people to have representation that focus on them. So that geographic compactness is really important.
Let's talk about a committee you serve on that you just came from, and that's the Judiciary Committee, because I know there are a host of issues there that cause you great concern.
We're looking at a number of different issues. One of the issues that we've been voting on over the last 2 weeks has been the Second Amendment. I am a very strong Second Amendment proponent. I was a prosecutor before I got elected to the legislature, so I have seen the impact of the criminal justice system on individuals, both positively and negatively, how we really fought hard in the last 20 years to make sure that victims are protected and that victims have rights, not just individuals who commit crimes. And right now there are a number of things going through that really do concern me. One was a bill that's passed the Senate, moved on to the House, that says on a report, not of any criminal activity, that can lead to a process where the government goes and gets a search warrant for your house. In my knowledge, I can't think of any other civil process, a process where somebody has not committed a crime or been accused or even alleged to commit a crime, that the government can get a search warrant and enter your house. That is bad policy and concerns me greatly.
That's the red flag law?
That's been termed the red flag, but it's really a search process that is very concerning. The bills that we're dealing with this morning in committee have to do with parole. Historically, our system was when a jury or a judge, after hearing the evidence and determined somebody was guilty of a criminal offense, would give a sentence, but that sentence didn't have any relationship to the amount of time the person would actually serve or not serve in jail. Frequently, there would be sentences of 30 plus years that would only result in 3 to 5 years of active jail time. And the jury would not know that. Now, judges probably had some idea, but juries certainly did not. So we came up with the idea, and this was before I was in the legislature, of truth in sentencing with no parole. And that meant that when an individual got their sentence, they were going to do the vast majority. That individual could still get good time credit for 15% of their sentence, but the math on that is pretty clear. If you get a year, you're going to do at least 10 months of that year. If you get 10 years, you're going to do at least 8.5 of that 10 years. There's a proposal now that would just eviscerate that system and return parole back, so that when a judge or a jury gave a sentence, regardless of how severe the impact was on the victims, how horrific the impact was on the community, a group of individuals were going to make a determination on parole looking at how that person reacted after they had been incarcerated and the impact that the judge and the jury took into account when they gave that sentence is going to be discounted. And that's a real concern. We should be giving victims just as much say in the system after a criminal act has occurred. Right now, our system, everybody knows the answers. If you take a plea or you want to have a trial, you know what the possibilities are. We're going to be changing that, returning to a system where we don't know what the outcomes will actually be if this passes.
Now, I assume there have been victims' rights organizations that have testified against that type of a process.
We're just starting the conversations. As you know, the legislative session moves very quick. There was some testimony in committee, but candidly, there's been a lot more focus on other issues and not this one. This one has not been highlighted as much as it should be.
What are some of the other gun issues that have come before the Judiciary Committee that concern you?
Well, there have been a number. One of the bills that's moving through the system, we've not yet seen it on the Senate side, is what guns individuals can possess. And one of the big concerns, there's been a lot of talk about capacity of a magazine or what you can put into a gun. And things are being classified as very serious weapons, and handling of any weapon is certainly something that should be taken with a lot of responsibility and seriously. But banning or prohibiting or registering are ones that are just extremely concerning when the government has taken over that role. And certainly, I think that some people do not realize we're talking about not what a firearm actually has in it, but what it could possibly do, even if you could create that in some unusual way. So those types of bills are really concerning. But they're myriad, it's a number of it. Having localities suing gun manufacturers, having different rules. In Virginia, we've done a very good job of making sure that if you move to different parts of the state, that there are a lot of constants in the rules. Localities have some flexibility, but citizens also have some uniformity as they move between one county and another or one city or another. A lot of those rules are being repealed and rolled back. And so if all those bills pass, it'll be very different and very concerning, because you could have a myriad of different rules as you moved up the Interstate 95, and you could be in compliance and a law-abiding citizen in one jurisdiction and go 100 yards into another and not be. And I think that's problematic.
So restricting certain weapons, I think it's popularly called the assault weapons ban, and apparently there's a definitional problem, as I understand it.
Well, if you consider a pistol that almost every law enforcement carries that holds more than 10 rounds, an assault weapon, most every pistol you can buy, even the ones that our grandparents and parents had in World War II, they can all hold more than 10 rounds, and they would meet that definition that was originally introduced in the Senate. And I know there's a bill in the other body, but we haven't gotten it yet.
Or is there a grandfather clause in either one of those?
In the original bill in the Senate, there was not. The bill in the House, because it hasn't gotten to us, I don't want to say what's in it or not, Woody, but even if there is a grandfather clause, it's still concerning.
Another public safety issue that has reared its head is the compensation of our sheriffs. What's going on with that?
Well, nationally, our law enforcement has been put in a not positive light. Locally, we see our law enforcement every day. They interact in the community. Particularly our sheriff's departments are very responsive. When there are issues and problems, they're there. When there's natural disasters or tragedies, accidents, they're always there and working. And we're fighting very hard to increase their compensation. So I've put in proposals that would increase sheriff's compensation 5%, as well as state police in each of the next 5 years. We also need to make sure our support staff that is supporting them are compensated as well. But the same issue is for teachers in addition to our law enforcement. And I was very disappointed to see that even though my colleagues on the other side of the aisle ran on something else, the governor did not put in a substantive raise for teachers in the budget, actually put it in the second year when they won't have to find the full money to support it. So we've put in a proposal that would increase teacher salaries 5% this year and 5% next year as well. Those core government employees like sheriffs, state police, and teachers, we need to make sure that we're supporting them. And the way to do that is through their compensation.
And especially in the rural areas, I take it, the impact is much greater.
It is, because in a lot of the rural areas, the ability to fund or help support additionally those law enforcement or teachers is not there. So certainly in the urban areas where you have more revenue coming in from sales and income tax, that is easier to do, but in rural areas, much more challenging.
Now, you've always had a bill in to change the way our budget process works. You want to go to a biennial budget, I take it?
Well, right now we have a biennial budget, but it doesn't track when the governor's term of office is. So a governor comes into office, they're elected in November, they swear the oath of office in January, but the governor that will not be around, introduces the budget for the first 2 years of that governor. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We want the governor coming in to be able to operate, whether Republican or Democrat, under a budget they propose. But more importantly, what happens when the governor is leaving, they can make a very political budget, a budget that they don't have to deal with the governing consequences, positive or negative, from. So I want to make the governors more responsible, more responsive, because they have to govern under the budgets they propose. So if we just switch when they make that 2-year proposal by 1 year, we can do that. And I think it would make our budgeting process much more sound. It's not a Republican or Democrat idea. Actually, that concept has flown out of the Senate many years. Our friends in the House of Delegates, though, it does impact when the budget comes to them and is not on their term of office, which has been the resistance. But we're going to keep pushing, because the governor introducing the budget is the first step in all of our funding processes, and we need to make sure that step, that we're getting a good introduced budget that the legislature then can alter as need be.
Is that why we have 2 budget bills in both the Senate and the House? Senate Bill 29, Senate Bill 30, House Bill 29, and House Bill 30.
You have those because the House feels it's their constitutional duty to introduce the budget. The Senate started a budget, I want to say close to 30 years ago now, so that the Senate is making the same impact on the budget direction as the House. The ultimate bill that passes at the end that the governor will sign will be the House bill, not the Senate bill.
But one is termed a caboose bill. Talk to us about that.
The caboose bill is we do a fiscal year budget. We don't run our budgets January to January. They're actually July 1 to June 30. So the caboose bill is filling the time between now, where we are at the beginning of February, until the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30. So any changes that need to be made there, school population changes, the estimates on the cost or tax revenues change, you can make those alterations in a caboose bill. But those changes are usually very small. They're not large changes. The most of the work is done in that that other bill, the one that takes in for the 2 years.
Now this year I understand we have a hole, I don't know how large it is, but it's due to what's called these gray machines that are eroding lottery funds. Talk to us about those machines, and have you seen them yourself?
Well, we have seen in Virginia just a tremendous increase in these gray machines. They almost look like slot machines, and frequently they're in gas stations or truck shops or even some restaurants. The lottery has indicated that since they really started sprouting up in June, that the lottery funds have reduced, and that would mean money not going back to schools. Some estimates that could be up to $40 million in a year. So there are proposals to deal with that. Either make those illegal so that they're not there, or to tax them so that the revenue going back to schools is made whole, since it appears that some behavior is moving away from lottery over to those machines. And so those proposals are working through the process. It is much more complicated because there's certain parts of the state that are aggressively pushing for casino gambling, and the impact that could have on those bills is yet unknown. So as we're having these conversations, there's a lot of different issues and a lot of different players that are also very focused on what the rules might be, and we're not there yet on what the outcome will be. It'll be an interesting couple weeks as we talk about gray machines, lottery, casinos, sports betting. All those things will be in the conversation, and I can't tell you what the answer will be yet.
Well, that certainly is going to have an impact on the economy, which is doing quite well. I think the unemployment rate is now 2.6%. Some of that has to do with the fact that we don't have to worry about sequestration, especially as that relates to defense spending. How do you think our economy is faring?
Well, right now our economy is doing well. Part of the reason, I think, is because of the federal tax cuts. And in Virginia, we gave $1 billion of those federal tax cuts, made sure that the citizens were able to keep that. And as people go to do their tax returns this year, they will see that their state withholding amount went up, so they'll keep more of their money. But candidly, Woody, some of the policies on the horizon are very concerning for that continued economic growth. Right to work, many people don't grasp what that really means, but what it really means is if you're in a business, can the union force you in a private company as an employee to pay union dues even if you don't want to join the union? And we're having a big conversation about that. We're also having a big conversation about whether teachers and sheriffs and police officers should be allowed to strike. It's called collective bargaining. But make no mistake, it is the ability for those government employees to say they want to strike as a group and not provide those government services until they get a different contract. That could also have a really big impact. And then there's some other proposals that would require project labor agreements, which would mean any large capital projects like I-95 construction, state building construction, or even some local building construction, you would have to use union labor. You have no choice. You can't go to a private company that doesn't do that, and the cost will go up. Those types of proposals will be devastating to Virginia's future economic growth and could really cause us to have a negative decline rapidly. There are a number of corporations or businesses that are making decisions now or holding back on decisions of whether to relocate to Virginia from other states or whether to expand pending the outcome of this legislation. It is very concerning.
What about the imposition of a minimum wage?
Minimum wage, also very impactful. It is less impactful in a place like Fairfax because the market is very strong. It is more impactful in rural parts of Virginia or the farther away you move from Fairfax. But the proposal moving through would take the minimum wage up to $15, which is great for some jobs, but if you're working at a convenience store or maybe you're unpacking boxes for a business, that might not, or a training wage or a intern, that might not be what an entity could afford. I think it'll force a lot of companies to move toward technological modifications. You'll see a lot of fast food restaurants move in that direction, thus eliminating jobs. And in rural areas, some businesses just will not be able to operate if they had to pay $15 an hour because the economy won't support it, their business won't support it.
I know you're active on the healthcare front as well. I know you have a bill dealing with balance billing, those bills people get after they've gone to an emergency room that can bankrupt them.
Woody, unfortunately, my wife has done an incredible job. She's a survivor of breast cancer. We've been through a number of procedures, 5 different things in the last 6 months now. So we've seen a lot of hospital time, more than I would like. But this came to me because a constituent said that they got a bill after going to an emergency room for a doctor's cost that they thought was covered with insurance, but they got a bill that the insurance company was not responsible for. And the term has been called surprise or balance billing. And it's a policy that should not be allowed. It's the only one that I think has come up in the last couple years. We've have a proposal in to eliminate that. The fight now, as it's moving through the committee process, is what side do we fall down on? Is it of support of the doctors or the hospitals or the insurance companies and the hospitals? And my position is it doesn't matter. We need to make sure that those patients going to the ER don't get that surprised or balanced bills, whoever's ox it gores on the other side. So we're fighting very hard to make sure that just because one side has a little bit of an advantage in negotiation in the ER doesn't mean that patient citizens are getting harmed. But that is one still in process, and it'll be interesting. We're also working on some certificate of public need reform, which many people might not know, but for most medical procedures, you actually have to apply to the state government and get a certificate before you can set up a hospital or a type of practice to perform many procedures, which takes all the competition out of the system. And we need to reform that, need some free market, because right now, Medicaid expansion focused on access to insurance. It did not focus on access to healthcare or better outcomes. We need to instill some of those free market policies back into healthcare so that people can be assured that they're getting good outcomes and good access as well.
30 seconds left. How will you define success at the end of the session?
Well, that's a big one. I am very concerned that if some of these bills that infringe upon Second Amendment rights and allow searches into your house pass, and some of these bills that are really bad for small businesses and jobs, it could be a really bad future for Virginia. So if some of them do not pass, that would be success.
Thank you for being here, Senator Ryan McDougle.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.